Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A content. It's a podcast, it's a video. For most people, it's a video.
It's everything. It's multimedia.
Yeah, we're different things to different people. We're trying to be everything to everyone, which is famously an easy and good thing to do. But sorry, did I say that this is season 12, episode 6?
You did now.
I did now. Getting into it, I like watching it in podcast form. Well, I don't for this because I actually don't.
You like podcast form in general.
I like podcasts in general better than videos when I can help it. But if you're watching the video, do you want to tell the people what they'll be seeing today?
So we've come to this a little bit late. We've done 10 seasons with not much in the way of themes, and the last 2 seasons, 11 and now 12, are themed.
Yeah.
This season has been the return of old favorites. And we're looking at some of the multiplayer teams that we like the best for different reasons. They can be good, they can be fun, they can be both. Teen Titans Raven is, as a team, is interesting. She has what I consider almost the ideal special 2.
Yeah.
And it makes her the ideal specialist. And in a world of Tentu Totem, that is your most important team player, team member.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I noticed that I hadn't before, because I've geared her to get critical hits with everyone. So here's the deal, right? Like, everybody gets used to using Legendary Gear only.
Yeah.
And I realized that I don't want her to have Claw of Horus, because her special 1 is a pain to use with 2 swipe minigames to max out her damage. Don't like that. And so we want to generate a little bit more power. Her signature gear generates power, and it has the added benefit of increasing crit chance on special 2. So with this gear loadout of Tentu Totem, Master's Death Cart, and her cloak, she actually crits 100% of the time. So that we now see that with her 5-hit special 2, she's getting just over 40,000 on the first 3 hits and just over 80,000 on the last 2 hits when it's not modified by anything from the opponents or by us.
Yeah.
So that means she gets 5 hits, 1/7, or 14% of the damage for the first 3 hits each. And then 2/7, or about 28.5% of the hits on the last one. So they're a decent amount of damage each one. And they can any of those hits can knock out an opponent. Mm-hmm. So she avoids that problem that the newer characters that might have slightly higher stats, she doesn't have that same problem. Mm-hmm. And so she's really good. The other thing is her special 2 is ranged. And normally you don't notice that much. But when you tag in against an opponent with power, when she's ranged and she's geared like this, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry that to wait until you get within range so that the first hit will make contact. Mm-hmm. Don't care, because you can just launch it whenever.
The timing is just easier and more comfortable.
Yeah, and exactly. There's almost no timing involved, really, because let's say you have somebody who's got a not range special 2, where the first hit will miss if it's too far away. Then you have to wait until you get close enough. You wait until you get close enough, there's better than half a chance that an opponent with power will hit you with a special first. Mm-hmm. And so what makes her a little bit interesting, though, is her passive, because she's one of the few characters that doesn't play nicely with Rebirth Raven. So her passive is Demonic Embrace. Special attacks have a chance to drain 25% health and power. Raven receives all health and power that has been drained. And so if her passive engages, then there's less for Rebirth Raven to steal, making Rebirth Raven less effective. Mm. So the 25% bonus, if we're talking about her passive now, is that it doesn't count as her special 2 in a way that matters for Tentu Totem, right? So if it's the 25% bonus that knocks out the opponent, she won't get her power back. But it's a not bad backup. It's effectively, if it weren't for that Tentu Totem effect, it's effectively increasing an already very high damage special 2.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, if say the opponent has got an invulnerability with Astra Harness, and all 5 hits of her special 2 are while the invulnerability is engaged, but the passive at the end does damage, and it can. So this is sort of one of the things you want to know, right? That it's not just, you don't need the first bit to do damage for the last part to count, because you can't always tell because it's a random chance. It's not all the time. But if that happens, you get your power back. So you can still do that chunk of damage and still get your power back, which is kind of neat. That little bit of damage at the end can also protect against an opponent's Rebirth Raven, so that if you finish your special 2 and she tags in and she steals your power, you still have a chance to steal some of it back.
Yeah.
Which is neat. So because Rebirth Raven is no good, we've got a single-use teammate, Red Lantern Hal Jordan. He's there for no other reason than to strip gears off everybody. He's geared that way, Claw of Horus, and Enchantress companion gear. The Astro Harness on him makes it even better, because that means that the first special 1 you do to shatter a gear doesn't cost you any health.
Yep.
And it also makes it easy on the timing, because you tag in, you're invulnerable, you do your special 1, and while you're waiting for the skulls to come flying in, you don't need to worry about their special. And because it's the Astro Harness invulnerabilities there, you just wait until he gets just over a bar of power, because that's my sort of visual timing to get it right.
Yeah.
And then I launch another special 1 that leverages the skulls, so then I can shatter all of the opponent's gears. And because you're invulnerable, you don't have to worry about having to block their basic
or them
combo.
Interrupting it or doing anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So because if they're hitting you at the moment when you need to do your special 1,
yeah,
you can't, right? Like
Sure.
if they get the timing right. Oh, and the extra kicker is, I mean, the wiki talks about how it's because Teen Titans Raven is not on the screen for the first parts of her special 2, but basically the final result is that you bypass Raven Prime's health swap passive, even if the animation shows Raven's health hitting the 20% range. Apparently, because she's not, our Teen Titans Raven, because she's not there, doesn't get the health swap. So a lot of times you'll see in these fights, she'll just mow right through Raven Prime and not have to worry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really good. I mean, this is it's a team of her, Hawkgirl, and Red Lantern Hal Jordan, but really it's her that makes it, and we're just filling the rest of the team with people that can make the fight easier for her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There we go. Getting into our first comment of the week. This one comes from Burke's Homemade Memes, and you always like to...
Burke, show me mad MMS.
Yeah. And so this is talking about Darkseid Prime. And they say, I guess this is a tie into something I talked about, but what do you think if there's a passive, but for silver characters instead? Let's say 200% instead of the bronze 300%, or even 150%. I think the obvious is that Silver Green Lantern will be a crucial member, but I feel Silver Wonder Woman might be a sleeper, and Silver Cyborg is going to launch unlimited specials like he has Tantu Totem. And so this is an interesting kind of question, because I think
it's something we've talked about before too.
Yeah, the goal really is, it would be nice if every single character was equally useful. And I know that games aren't, like that, they don't have to be. But it seems like for all that effort, especially because some bronze and silver passives are interesting and cool, right? Mm-hmm. Like reduction in basic damage, that kind of stuff. You can make them work, but the sort of implication there is you can make them work because they don't work by themselves, just because the lower stats is always going to be the thing holding them back. And so I would like something that would allow sort of bronze and silver characters to become relevant, more like gold characters. And I think for silver characters, the thing is, what that is probably is fully maxing out their attack and health augments, right?
Yeah, but it's still not
enough.
Yeah.
But the way that we do it is having, them at lower elite, having golds at lower elite levels, and then fully maxing out a silver. Yeah. I think you could probably bring them to close to, if not the same level as like where we keep our golds.
So I like the idea. I like Burke's idea of having a similar kind of passive with silvers, because the principle isn't just to make the bronzes better, but at the cost of either leaving Darkseid really weak, or of having Darkseid just still be so much better than the bronzes that the bronzes
still kind of doesn't matter,
right? And silvers are perfect. I like what you said about the Nightwing, the Bronze Nightwing, have a really good passive. And I think besides, Regime Green Lantern and Regime Wonder Woman as being, is the Silver Wonder Woman's Regime? No, I think she might be just straight Wonder Woman, right? Because Regime is the gold one. Anyway, sorry. Silver Wonder Woman is good because she gets that boosted damage on her specials. Green Lantern is good because he's good on even gold teams with his power gen boost. But I think you're missing Nightwing. I think it's Regime Nightwing, who's got a slightly even better passive. So he reduces basic damage by 50%. And that is super. Like, that would be wild. And I think you're right, because the more you can... A big part of the game is collecting stuff.
Yeah.
And you spend probably years collecting it. And I know the developers probably don't care the same way, but in my mind, once you've collected everything, a lot of games are just done. In this case, though, part of the joy is that sandbox thing where you get to put characters together, play around with different passives, and the closer they are in stats. So instead of having to make, if you had to team silvers and golds together, the only way to do that would be to keep your gold weak, or to make your silver super strong. Wouldn't it be so cool if we had a passive? We used to think that like a really great gold Nightwing's passive would be like 75% basic damage reduction, right?
Would be.
Yeah, but even 50% would be really kind of cool. And if you could use the passive of another character, like some other variation on the Darkseid passive, I would love that.
Yeah, I think really the thing is that I want more interesting, like, trade-offs and decisions, right? I think that is where sort of I find the most engagement in the team building.
But that's funny, though, because some people only ask for help. Like, they don't even care. It's fun. I agree with you. I think that there's a real joy in that, but the number of people who are on board saying, tell me what to do. Tell me what team to make. Well,
I think ultimately, right, you want to end up with something good, but I think you sort of, to me, the interesting part of the planning part is figuring out stuff yourself, right? And having to make trade-offs and figuring it out. And I think the one issue that I would have if it was a passive is that I think it would limit your possibility space, because you would need to dedicate one person guaranteed on your team in order to make it work. And then you need to have at least one silver. And then at that point, it would feel almost like a waste to not have a second silver character there. What I think I would almost prefer, and I don't know how you'd exactly go about this, but I almost would prefer a gear that would somehow boost the stats of a character. Like, one thing that they could do that would be, I think, interesting would be to, if there was a gear that would copy the stats of like the highest stat character on your team or something like that. And that would be an easy way of sort of bringing one character of any tier up to the level of the rest of your team.
Or so how about this? One gear that would do it for health, one gear that would do it for attack.
Yeah, maybe.
And so, because if you did it for more than one stat, I think that would be too powerful.
But you could do something like that, for example, right? And then to me, being able to build a full team and like losing sort of a couple like gear slots worth of flexibility to me would feel a lot more free than losing a whole character slot worth of flexibility.
So one gear whose only ability would be to increase the attack to the strongest member as high as the strongest member. One for health, but the attack would be for basic attacks only. And then a third gear for special attacks.
Yeah, that would be kind of interesting, right? Because you could make a glass cannon, and obviously there would be secondary effects on all of those. And ideally, they'd be legendary gears, and the secondary effects would all be related to, basic attacks, special, or health. I think the one thing that would be kind of funny or interesting about that is that if you wanted to, like, depending on the order of operations, if you could boost it to the highest level of attack, if it was after gear score, then you could like multiply and make it really ridiculous, but you probably wouldn't want to let it work like that. But I think something like that, I do think that on a base level, I really like the idea of making more people useful and being able to bring up characters to a level where you can make those interesting choices of putting them on a team. But I do feel like, and we saw that with Darkseid, right? It's really hard to balance it to make a good team together.
Unless you planned way ahead to keep Darkseid low.
Well, and the thing is that even in the best case scenario, you don't end up with a team that is as good as your other gold teams. You end up with a team that has bronzes being a lot more useful than they would otherwise be, but you still just end up with one specific gold and two bronzes, right? And so I think if you did the same thing with silver, you'd still just end up with one specific gold whose passive would not be beneficial to themselves, and then two silvers. And even if their stats were really high, you know, it would be kind of limiting, right? You couldn't make sort of those interesting teams the way that you can with other stuff. So I think something like a gear would feel a lot more interesting to me because you could still actually like make an interesting team around it and not just like close to like a pre-made team almost, right?
I'll tell you what, I don't even mind. I mean, we're doing this basically or effectively anyways by putting Hawkgirl in. She is there only for her passive to transfer in and out faster, to tag in and out faster. And I'm okay with that as long as it's just the one person. I mean, Rebirth, you know what? I say that, and Rebirth Raven a little bit is she's there for her passive too to steal power.
Yeah. But to me, the thing with Hawkgirl that's different is that she makes the other team members good and interesting, and it's kind of a lot more broad, right? I feel like having Hawkgirl in those quick swaps has all these little ways that it applies, and you put her with gold teams, and gold cards tend to have, with power creep, bigger and better passives. I think the problem is that you would have a gold character whose passive would be enabling other characters who don't have as good passives as other gold characters. So the fact that they wouldn't have a good passive by themselves, it would just be to support the rest of the team. And then the silvers, some silvers have, you know, relatively interesting passives, right? Like Nightwing. But broadly speaking, silver passives tend to be worse than gold passives. So even by bringing up the stats, you sort of have with silvers, are there any multi-part like passives? There must be some, but I can't think about
I haven't played any of them for so long.
Yeah.
But to me, it would be enough. Like there's enough nostalgia. The idea of playing with them and having them not being completely outclassed. I mean, in a ladder in the 7th fight, your stats are way lower than the opponents anyways.
Yeah.
Because we've got these 3 gear slots, you can make a character. Like think of all the golds that we play that have effectively no passive.
No, that's true. You make a good point. I think it would be usable, but I still think I would want a little bit more if they were going to implement something like that. But I think I would definitely be okay with it. It would be cool, I think, overall, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. We've talked about this before. It would be just so much better to not only only be able to bring up bronzes to a level that's not quite high enough to be competitive. Yeah.
So there we go. Do you want to move on to the next question?
Yeah.
This one comes from,
show me mad MMS.
This one comes from Cameron1072, and they say, I couldn't have ever predicted the way all this turned out, but Trump's re-election feels kind of inevitable now. I thought things looked bad when Biden didn't do too well in the debate, but with the shooting and Biden having now dropped out, it's hard to see a scenario in which Trump doesn't win. I'm not too fond of Harris either, and then in brackets, her history of prosecuting black people for minor charges and extending their sentences doesn't look great, but I suppose most Democrats would take her over Trump. But it's as you said, none of these candidates seem worthy of your vote, it's just that the other one is worse. Also, it really sucks to see so many NetherRealm employees laid off. I was somewhat selfishly only thinking about the future of this game when I heard about that, but it's awful to see them lose their jobs. I hope they know how much this community appreciates their work. So we'll maybe tackle this in parts.
Yeah, I like the NetherRealm part, actually. Yeah. I still remember, so there used to be a shoes, the shoe company called Prospectors.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? You probably don't.
Not at all. Not even a little bit.
So I always had trouble getting shoes. Now at this point, because I'm old, I don't care as much, so I don't even wear like office shoes. I wear Vibram 5 fingers to work. I wear them to work when it's not wet, and I have a pair at work that I leave. So I wear toe shoes. I guess, like 16 years ago, it was a bigger deal because nobody was wearing them. Now I am, I think, one of the oldest people at my work now. So nobody cares. I've been wearing them forever, and it's like nobody knows.
You're just the weird old guy. It's one of your quirks.
It is.
As long as it's not like negatively impacting your work performance, or you're being like weird to your coworkers or something.
Like I'm not a creep, not a perv. I just have super comfortable shoes.
Out of the things that your coworker could be doing that is out of the ordinary or worth remarking on, it's one of the better ones.
Right. So back before I had those, though, Prospectors were super comfortable shoes. Yeah. They were made really wide. At the time I liked cushioning, so they had plenty of cushioning. They had lots of room if you need to put an insert in it. And what separated them was that if the outsole, what's the part that's on the outside? The sole? Is it just the sole?
I think it's just called the sole.
If the sole ever...
It's the insole and then the sole, I think.
There's the midsole. There's an insole. There's a midsole. So that's the part where it's cushioning. And then there's a hard outer part.
Yeah.
So the sole might be the whole
what's
thing.
a shirt versus a t-shirt? Is there a type of clothing that's just a shirt?
I think shirt is a broader category.
Yeah. So is sole, but sole is not a broader category.
A sole is like it encompasses all of it.
But
like
if you just talk about the sole, is the sole the whole thing?
I think so.
Outsole? Okay, I don't know.
It's all the part that's under your feet.
I've never thought about this before. This very moment.
So it might be the outsole. I don't know. Anyways, it's sort of besides the point. But that they would, for the lifetime of your shoe, if your sole wore out, you could mail them in. As long as you paid for shipping, they would resole your shoes for you.
That's cool.
And the way it ties in the story, though, is that they got bought out.
Yeah.
I think the brand still exists, but some other company bought them out, and they stopped doing it. And so when I mailed it in, it was right at that cusp of time when before I mailed it in, it wasn't an issue. By the time it got there, and when I called to find out what was going on, the customer support said, well, they're not doing it anymore because the company was sold.
But they still had your dang shoe.
And, well, they sent them back. But a bunch of them were losing their jobs. So it's that same idea. So I was feeling really bad about not having my shoes resold.
Yeah.
Because that was part of the appeal of buying them. And I ended up getting a bunch on sale. So it's not like I got ripped off, but I think part of the price was built in, right?
Yeah.
To have at least one or two.
Well, yeah, when something is like a free extra, right?
Right, it's not
built
really
in
free.
because somebody's paying for it. Like free shipping. Because they need to make enough money to pay for your shipping.
Well, no. I have to pay for shipping.
Yeah.
But then they would resole. But resoling is not cheap.
No, but I'm saying for free shipping in general with companies, right? Like there's no real things as free shipping, right? The company is paying for it, and they need to make money, so they're charging you for shipping. Yeah.
So, but the uppers were nice. They were comfortable. They were well made. So the shape of a shoe is called the last. So the shoe last was a nice shape that suited my feet. And so it's the same sort of thing, right? Like it just made me think of that. So all our interactions, the problem is our interaction is really only with the game.
Yeah.
So the developers, unless we talk about it or make the effort to think about them as people, are sort of an abstract idea.
A conglomerate.
Yeah. And so it really does suck. I can't imagine what it would feel like where, I mean, it's got to be really kind of cool to have the opportunity to be creative and get paid for it and make a living at it. It's got to be that much just as bad as that's cool when you lose your job through no fault of your own because the product you're creating is still pretty good, right? Yeah. We can all agree. I think Injustice, Gods Among Us is a pretty great game.
Well, the thing I think too is that even if it wasn't good, I think your role in it is so fractionalized that you could be a great artist or programmer or like physics engine person or back end or, software engineer, whatever, right? And the product could be bad. So I think even if the product was bad, it wouldn't necessarily even mean that you should lose your job or that you're responsible for it. But it's got to be even more annoying when it is also good, right? In addition to that.
Yeah.
Because it's not your fault when it's bad, but you feel like or it's not necessarily your fault.
Well, but at least there's, how people in general like to believe that the world is just.
Yeah, it's a cleaner story of you made a bad game and so now everyone is losing their job.
So it's not that unjust for you to lose your job for that, but it's not. It's worse. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Kamala Harris is interesting because I've heard a lot of those criticisms about her because she was either she was an attorney general or district attorney. I don't know.
She was a DA.
Was she a DA only?
I believe. I don't know. I don't know if she became attorney general.
So I think here's the problem. Politicians in general are in the system. They are the system. They are the man. They are what potentially oppresses people. And when you're involved in the legal system, I think there is at least a structural kind of oppression. I mean, that is sort of by definition, right? That you have to have some sort of instrument or institution of power. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting to me is that there's stuff, that I was talking to somebody that came up that at one point when she was still doing that work, her colleagues and maybe even some opponents were jokingly calling her a social worker. Yeah. Because some of the stuff she was doing was not typical for somebody in her position, where she was actually advocating for support rather than punishment.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder how much of it is, it's like previous elections where some of this mud that's being slung by their opponents, because I think where Kamala Harris is going to benefit this time is without an extended primary where it's other Democrats that are picking on her because they want their candidate to win.
Yeah. You
can avoid it this time. And part of it was that was the message from the previous struggle when she was trying to fight to be the Democratic nominee.
Yeah. And,
the Republicans are leaning into it a little bit. And she's not really as bad. And I think you can't get away from being... Do you remember? You wouldn't have remembered probably. So I'm trying to think of all the other candidates that maybe didn't get the same kind of flack. Like, but, others who did. Like Al Gore.
Yeah.
He got a huge amount of flack for saying that he built the internet when that's not what he said.
Yeah.
And if you actually look at his statements where he contributed to it in a way like to let it flourish,
it's fair and reasonable.
I think it was totally reasonable. There was other things that they did. John Kerry, where the Republicans criticized his service.
Yeah.
And sometimes when something's not true, if you repeat it enough, then if you come at it from a secondary source and you hear it enough, then it sounds believable.
People
enough.
Just go, "Oh yeah, I heard that."
Yeah, and then it becomes part of your knowledge with it when you don't have the sort of those meta tags to let you know, oh, where did this knowledge come from and how reliable is it? And there's just so much noise that kind of disinformation is super effective, which is why they keep on doing it. And I think Kamala Harris gets a bit of a bad rap. And I think part of it is, so here's the thing. My dad is a bit of a bigot. Not a bit, a lot. And so I remember when Dr. Jane Philpott was part of the federal government and she was given the health portfolio.
Yeah.
And my dad says, well, how she qualified? How does she know what she's doing to get whatever?
Yeah.
She's a doctor. She actually works in the system. She's got more experience than most politicians with the healthcare system for making decisions. And what gets me is my dad would not say that about a man. Yeah. Never did. Didn't care about anybody else.
That's the first time you've ever heard him talk about the health minister position.
Seriously.
That's like the joke where people are talking about like, like tearing down statues or like trans people in sports. And they're like, well, I don't believe I've ever heard you care about this at all. It's like, it really rings hollow to me that you even care about this issue. Yeah. And there's a separate question about whether the things that you're saying are right or wrong. And, oftentimes it is coming from a place of like hate or bigotry. So I think on a separate level, this doesn't feel like a real conversation to me because I don't think that you actually care about, like this specific like sub branch of women's sports or like this statue in a park somewhere. Like I don't think that this has mattered to you before it became like a political talking point.
So, and what's wild to me is that, you'll never get him to admit that he's, racist or sexist or whatever. It'll be just because, well, I'm just asking questions.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the most pernicious type where, it's going to be hard to change because if it's so ingrained and subconsciously, perpetrated that is what Kamala Harris experiencing now. Is it racism? Is it sexism? Who knows? We're never going to know. But I'm always like, I now that I'm more aware of that kind of stuff, I'm so much more suspicious when people get criticized for stuff that you don't see the same kind of evidence. Like, here's the thing. Trump, a lot of criticisms are self-evident. You've got him saying stuff at rallies like, hey, just vote 4 years. You won't need to vote again.
Yeah. We'll fix it.
We'll fix it.
We'll take care of it or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, I've read some criticism or some commentary that the most generous idea is that, that he's, I don't even know what it is. I think if I'm going to really stretch it, maybe he's thinking that he's talking about abortion, that they're going to
or
fix
whatever,
it,
or that he's
going to
fix stuff up for the country, and then
Right.
it's fine because after that he's done his second term, so he doesn't care if people vote after that because he won't have any skin in the game.
Right, because this is his only term.
Yeah,
But given all the context of everything else, right?
I saw something online where people were talking about it. It was they had made up a guy that was very funny to them, which is somebody who was not voting for Trump, but only because they thought that the election was stolen last term, and so he already had 2 terms, and so he wasn't eligible anymore.
Oh, right.
Which is it's
That's
fun.
funny.
It's funny because it's if somebody technically is thinking through like logic, they go, the election was stolen, he's actually the president, right?
Yeah.
Then and they believe in a 2-term limit, they theoretically would not, but those people I don't think really exist.
They don't exist.
There might be a couple.
No.
There might be 1 or 2 people that are like, you don't think at all?
I don't think they exist.
I think there's so many different kinds of people that there are people that I so deeply don't understand that I'm always hesitant to say there would be nobody like that. I find it exceptionally unlikely.
The only if you add the qualification that they have to be not thought disordered, they have to actually think even a minimal amount of rationality.
Mm-hmm.
They won't do that because their argument, they can easily slide in the argument to say, well, he did win it, but because he never got the chance to do it, then he absolutely should get another chance. I don't think there's going to be anybody who's like that.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be if you're delusional. Delusional thinking is not rational.
Mm-hmm.
You can be delusional. I think that's possible. I think so if you have the right kind of delusion, but I think if there's a, not thought disordered person,
mm-hmm.
doesn't exist.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And I will say, for what it's worth, I have heard stuff about Kamala, right? I've heard, I think, some of the stuff that Cameron is talking about. I have not really looked into it and verified it myself. And I think that is one of the things that is important. I think one of the things you've been talking about is sort of information sourcing and sort of thought monitoring, and not in terms of like managing what other people are thinking of, but sort of analyzing and evaluating your own thoughts and ideas and beliefs and information that you have, and thinking about where it came from, why you believe it, whatever else, right?
Yeah.
And I think it is important because propaganda is a very broad term. I think it's used very negatively, but like all political parties and organizations and people are doing propaganda, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're making messages and constructing stories and narratives. Like one thing I've seen a couple of videos of like Pete Buttigieg recently, and I know very little about his specific policies.
Right.
But I've seen him say things about, gay rights and talk about his relationship with his husband, right?
Yeah.
In the face of homophobia. I've seen him talk about like transit and other stuff like that. And he comes across, exceptionally well spoken, like warm and caring and invested in the work that he's doing, knowledgeable about the work that he's doing. Mm-hmm. And when I hear him talk, I get a really strong sense of him being like a competent and thoughtful person, right?
Sure.
And so, I come away from that having really sort of positive associations with him, right? My gut reaction, if I heard that he was going to be like the VP nom, I would be like, oh yeah, I have a good sort of feeling about him, right? But it's also important for me to, that being said, I know like nothing about his policies, right?
Right.
I can infer from context that by the fact that he is both a gay man and like a supporter of gay rights and talks about it and is in the public eye talking about it,
right,
that he would be a supporter of queer rights. But I don't know that, right?
Right.
And so, like, for all I know, he might be willing to, pass, like, transphobic legislature. And again,
right,
I'm not saying that he is. I'm saying that I literally just don't know, right?
Right.
And so I think it is sort of important to... And so in this case, because I'm not voting in the election, right, I feel like I'm more uninformed than I'd like to be to have a strong opinion. It's the point where I would have an issue expressing a strong opinion one way or another on like Kamala,
right?
Not relative to Trump, right? Expressing my opinion relative, it's definitely her, but expressing my opinion on her in a vacuum, right? Independently, if I think that she would do a good job leading the country, or that she would represent sort of my interests in the world being more, like the way I want it to be when she's done her term, right? I just don't know. Right. And I think that it is one of the problems I'm seeing in politics, and it's because it's really easy, right? There's that whole like, oh, you want somebody that you could grab a beer with or whatever. But for otherwise because they can't tell you about every policy decision.
Yeah.
That on some level you just have to like them and like their vibe. And
right, because you're not, if they don't cover everything they're going to do, at some point it's just got to be, you got to trust that the decision they make on something they haven't talked about is going to be in line with your values.
Yeah, and that feels both necessary, and I understand why it happens, and also inadequate for people to be really maximally politically involved. So it's an interesting sort of tension. But I think, like, I coming up to the election, it is important to think about sort of the difference between vibes and feelings about people and cold hard facts, and the difference between sort of how well spoken they are and the policy that they advocate for and all of these other things. And which is all just to say, you know, like, it's important to look at where you're getting information from, why you feel the way that you do. And on a baseline level, if there's concrete, verifiable, like, policy stuff, right? Yeah. If or their sort of work history or the decisions they've made in the past.
Right? Work history.
Yeah.
Supreme Court.
You really want to, wherever possible, like, hold on to stuff that is concrete and real. Because I think every single person who's running for politics where they need your vote wants to come across well to you. And that is, in many ways, until they're elected, their biggest and most important job is coming across well to the most people possible.
Yes.
So I think it's ultimately a different skill and a different sort of thing than how effective they're going to be in their policy decisions and what they're actually going to do. Right. You know, we think about, like, Justin Trudeau, and again, you know, however you feel about him, was pretty charismatic and made promises that he definitely did not follow through on.
Yeah.
Right. And so the problem is that I think if you look at sort of just the sort of personal appeal, right, the words that they say, if they sound right, and how you feel about him as a guy, you get a different sense, right? No matter how much you like or dislike him, ultimately you get a different sense from hearing him and feeling him out than you do from, like, his actual time in office. Right. Yeah. Interesting. And anyways, I hope Trump doesn't win, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I mean, for very concrete reasons, like basic stuff that he's talking about, slapping a tariff on anybody. He hasn't mentioned Canada specifically. Yeah. But I think that would be very damaging, potentially, for basically any industry in Canada that relies on exports.
I think the last thing that I want to say, just very quickly, is that, you know, this comment, the re-election feels kind of inevitable. I feel like I understand that feeling, and I think it's a logical feeling, and I see exactly where it comes from. But I think it's so important in most things that are, like, political or, like, in terms of, like, social issues and stuff like that, you have to fight that kind of apathy or those feelings of inevitability, because sometimes things are just not going to go your way, but I think everybody has a responsibility as much as they can to work towards they want to see. It feels like that. It's totally fine for it to feel like that. That's not something that you can necessarily control, but you can control what you do.
So I was listening to an interview Ada Palmer did. It was some BBC radio thing.
Yeah.
And where she was talking about the idea that, if you tell people, if you let people believe that history is just inevitable, that it's a wave, that it is a process, it's something that just sort of rolls past you, then people are not going to care, and they're going to just feel defeated. But if you show them that in real life, history is made up of a lot of different small people making decisions independently and together, then they're going to feel like, I really want to do something.
Yeah. It's like the thing where there are two ways of thinking about, like, IQ or intelligence. One is that, like, you can build it and it's, like, flexible, and the other that it's, like, a trait that you're, like, born with and it's like an innate thing. Yeah. And if you think it's flexible, you will be able to get smarter if you want to. And if you think it's a trait thing, you will sort of stay where you're at. So feel those feelings. It's not that, like, despair or those feelings of inevitability don't make sense. Right. But the more that you are able to fight them, you know, be in community with the people around you, you know, contact representatives, vote, all these things. Just can fight that feeling and continue to do what you can. Not to say that feeling is unreasonable, but just, you know, I think we ultimately owe it to ourselves and each other to do what we can where we can. So I understand that feeling. I've seen a lot of that kind of sentiment, but
I felt it sometimes too.
You know, still doesn't mean you shouldn't vote, I guess, ultimately.
Yeah,
for whoever that is for. Even if I disagree with you, ultimately, I'd rather everybody votes than everybody not vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with us. We'd like to give a little extra special thank you to all of our lovely patrons on Patreon, right?
Yeah.
Those are people who support us in a very direct and tangible way. So it's a huge thank you to Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, Hoshi127, Nora Klimek, Paolo-Cesar-Pablo-Juan supporting us on the credited level, as well as 5x5 supporting us on the gratitude level. Thanks to everybody who gave us comments for us to talk about this week, and thanks to everybody for interacting or engaging with us however you do, right? At the very least, you made it to the end of this video. So thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.